Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Pandora Papers, Exposing Financial Crime with Graph Technology. My name is Meryl Lee, and I'm part of the webinar team here at Neo4j, and I'm joined by Dr. Maya Natarajan and Michael Hunger, and our guests from Gutiérrez and ICIJ. We're super excited you could be with us today. So a quick note regarding questions before we get started. We invite you to submit any questions you have throughout the session using the Questions tab located at the top of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of today's presentation, and if we don't get to them all, someone on the Neo4j team will reach out to you directly, or you can send an email to webinar@neo4j.com, and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Maya.
Thanks, Marilee, and hello, everyone. My name is Maya Natarajan, and I'm Senior Director of Product Marketing at Neo4j, responsible for all things knowledge graphs. I can't tell you how excited, awestruck, and humbled I am today to be joined by members of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ. We have Emilia Diaz-Struck, who's Data and Research Editor, and Miguel Fiandor, who's a Data Analyst and Engineer, who are going to be sharing with us their investigation of the Pandora Papers, how it was done, how they broke the story, who was implicated, and much, much more. Joining them to share a demo with real data is Jean Villedieu, Managing Director from our partner organization, Linkurious. And last but definitely not least, we have Michael Hunger, who's Senior Director of User Innovation at Neo4j. And he's going to present on how to apply graph technology to other use cases in the financial industry. As you can see, we've brought together a super knowledgeable team, so this is going to be a really, really good webinar. There's lots to do, so let's get started. What I thought would be fun was to start off with how investigative journalism has evolved. You know, I'm going to harken us back to days of the Watergate scandal, exactly 50 years ago. It's funny I say this, it broke in 1972. I'm just going to give you a little bit of trivia. That's when knowledge graph, the term knowledge graph was actually coined as well. So 1972 seems to be a big year. In any event, interestingly enough, when you read about the investigative work done, you realize that for the most part, Woodward, Bernstein, and their colleagues were the only ones focusing on the story. And for such a big story, it was pretty localized. You know, there definitely wasn't any collaboration amongst journalists from the different media outlets. In fact, if anything, everyone was very secretive, and they wanted to be the first ones to break any important news. Now, of course, keep in mind, again, this was 50 years ago, so there was no internet. So all data was in paper format. You know, you had files, folders, and much, much more. And if you wanted to transfer data, it had to be done physically, like you put it on a truck and then you drive it to another location. So in short, investigative journalism was done by individual reporters, really working on the paper trail, much like a detective, you know, who follows the path of a crime scene. And then they also were, you know, they had very long turnaround times. So for the most part, these stories had local impact. And while there was a large amount of data, there was really no sharing or collaboration of any sort. Now, let's fast forward to today. Data volumes are much, much higher and increasing on a daily basis. Stories that break are also much larger now, and not just involve parts of a country, but the whole world sometimes. And each journalist may work locally, but then collaborate with colleagues around the world to get the bigger picture of a story. And I'm going to say something, and it's going to be tongue-in-cheek, so pardon me, but journalists today really can't rely on the corkboard and string method to keep track of all the activities that fraudsters are up to. In fact, you know, if you look at it, fraudsters always try to be a step ahead, finding ways to avoid getting caught. And so they're up to, you know, they're up on all the latest methods that are available, right? And for all of that, you know, for all the tracking that we need to do, you need technology. And here, not just any technology, but graph technology. So let's take a look at why graph technology. As I mentioned before, and we all know, data volumes are increasing. In 2019, we had about 40 zettabytes of data. For those of you who are unfamiliar with a zettabyte, it's equal to 1 trillion gigabytes. It's a mind-boggling number. In 2020, it was 50 zettabytes of data. And last year, the numbers aren't out yet, but it's predicted maybe that we had about 75 zettabytes of data. So of course, data volumes are on the rise. Secondly, and more importantly, we have a new generation of data. And what do I mean by that? Data is no longer simple. It's complex. First of all, data does not live on its own. It's probably connected to other data somewhere via relationships. Data is also deeply hierarchical and nested, and many a times it's hidden. Okay, so all these different forms of complex data can only be leveraged by graph technology, as graphs are the only type of technology that can handle relationships or what we call connected data. Let's see how. In a graph database like Neo4j, data and relationships are stored together. That means that related nodes are physically linked in the database. So accessing those relationships is as immediate as accessing the data itself. With a graph, you simply read the relationship from storage, so it's really quick. And querying the graph is as simple as traversing the graph or walking the graph. Okay, now try this with any other type of technology and you will fail. Other technologies just can't handle relationships at all. And maybe some can, maybe the SQL or relational type of databases can, but it's a very tough, it's an uphill battle to actually analyze relationships with a SQL or relational database. Now, why are relationships important? Relationships connect data together and they add context. Data with context is very powerful as we can use it confidently for complex decision making. Now, you could have data in disparate sources and not have a clue whether a piece of data in an email is connected to data in a legal document, for instance. That's where graph technology comes into play. It brings data together and helps identify those relationships that may be obvious, but more often than not, it identifies relationships that are not so obvious. And you can see that this is especially essential in investigative journalism, where you're trying to see if there are any dubious connections amongst the various players in your data, right? Now, just as importantly, you need to be able to visualize these connections, just like you would with a corkboard and string. That's where our partner Linkurious comes in. They provide intuitive data visualizations, and you can use it quickly to identify patterns of unusual transactions. That brings me to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ. It's an organization of about 280 journalists based in over 100 countries who collaborate together to do cross-border investigations. Now, they've broken numerous stories, and if you're familiar with the ICIJ, most of their big stories, I believe, and I could be wrong, so Emilia and Miguel, please keep me honest here, but most of their big stories all start off with a P. We have the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and now the Pandora Papers. That's not all. There are many, many other investigations they've released, and I just want to point out that you don't have to be a member of the ICIJ to collaborate. In fact, the Pandora Papers was a collaborative effort of about, I want to say 600 journalists. Now, before I hand over to Emilia and Miguel, I'd like to take a few moments to talk about what's happening on the other side of the world, especially because it's happening right now and we're right in the middle of it. And I'm talking about Ukraine. I want to quickly say that we, of course, strongly condemn the invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign European nation, by the Russian forces. This is in clear violation of international law. We're moved by the courage of the Ukrainian people who are going through unimaginable lengths to protect themselves and their country. But in the same vein, I also want to point out the bravery of Russians protesting against their state despite all the risks. Now, what I wanted to do here was to focus on the super rich Russians. You'll see that, interestingly, Russia's super rich, including Putin and his oligarchs, have massively increased their wealth during the COVID pandemic. Russia's oligarchs have the highest share of wealth to GDP of all the major capitalist economies, and that's clearly shown here. Like other billionaires, Russian oligarchs export and hide their wealth in tax havens, and their offshore wealth is way higher than other billionaire groups. And so what's happened is the US and the EU are launching a task force to identify, hunt down, and freeze assets of sanctioned Russian companies and oligarchs, their yachts, their mansions, and any ill-gotten gains that they can find and freeze. And I have to say, they don't have to look too far to find this information, since the ICIJ has done a lot of work in this area already. For a long time, it was hard to figure out who and what assets were involved, But since the ICIJ has been in existence, they've constantly broken so many stories involving Russian oligarchs. And here you'll see some of those stories, starting in 2013 with the offshore leaks to the 2015 Swiss leaks, and then the 2016 Panama Papers and the 2017 Paradise Papers. The Russian oligarchs are in every major scandal. And I'm sure Emilia and Miguel can shed more light on this. So without further ado, let me hand over to Emilia. Emilia?
Yes, thanks very much, Maya. It's an honor to be here and share this space with both Neo4j and Linkurious, which are technologies we use as part of our investigations. I'm Emilia Diaz-Struck. I'm a data and research editor at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and ICIJ is a 25-year-old organization. We have our network of members, which, as Maya described, has more than 200 journalists around the world. And our staff itself is about 40 people. And actually, I have the honor as part of our staff to work with a tremendous talented team of journalists, data analysts, developers, people who are passionate about data and are part of our data and research team. And we connect the data as part of our reporting processes and serve our whole network. And we figure out how data can help with our investigations. So let's go back to October 3rd, 2021. You might remember that's the day when the Pandora Papers was published. And that actually didn't start that day. That actually started more than 2 years before that, when ICIJ started receiving big trove of records. It was actually more than 2.9 terabytes of data, more than 2.9 terabytes of documents, records in many different formats. It was more than 11.9 million files. And this was a big mess. We had close to 6.4 million documents. That was like PDFs, Word documents, and other formats, more than like close to 3 million images, emails, spreadsheets. And they were not ready like to just be there and have the investigation. It took us more than 2 years to do the whole investigation, process the data, analyze the data, and put order to that mess, and do the whole reporting to connect the dots from the data and outside the data to find which are the main stories that are part of the Pandora Papers. And we're still mining this data and finding new stories. So, but this 2.9 terabytes of records, like these millions of records, it was like a big offshore data tsunami. And everyone would be like, what do you do with this? So in our case, as Maya has already mentioned, we have had experience dealing with offshore information or offshore financial information, and also with large troves of data. Basically, our first offshore project was back in 2013 when our director, Gerald, received a hard drive. He was not then the director. He was working on a big investigation in Australia on a scandal called Firepower. And that hard drive contained information on offshore companies registered in different countries. And that allowed us to understand, and we started exploring what the impact of the offshore system had in citizens around the world, tax avoidance, illicit financial flows, and so on. But he became ICIJ's director and landed that with that hard drive and said, could this be a project for our network? And that's how ICIJ started developing itself in terms of analyzing and exploring these offshore topics, but also evolving and developing its way in which, how can we address these big troves of documents? After offshore leaks, we had Swiss leaks, Lux leaks, and then we had these massive leaks that came in 2016 and 2017, the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. And the experience that we had there, Panama Papers was tied to one offshore provider, Mossack Fonseca, based in Panama. Paradise Papers was two providers plus some corporate records from different secrecy jurisdictions. And we were dealing then with between 11 and more than 13 million records. The case of the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, the records, Süddeutsche Zeitung got the files and then shared with ICIJ, and then we coordinated the whole collaboration. But there we continue developing strategies in which how can we share this with hundreds of journalists around the world? How can we mine these records, make sense of this information? Because we're not talking about, let's say, a Hemingway novel. We're talking about very complex financial information. And within those millions of files, not everything is necessarily landing in an investigation. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of offshore entities, many names too behind those hundreds of thousands of offshore entities, people behind them. And then what are they using these offshore entities for? So in the case of Pandora, that was even more complex than what we have dealt before, not only because of the variety of file formats, but also because the data didn't come from one single offshore service provider, but instead it came from 14. And it gives us an expansive view on what was going on in different countries and in different jurisdictions, because these providers were based in different jurisdictions and provided services to citizens around the world. And to make sense of that, we ended up doing the largest collaboration we have ever worked on, which involved more than 600 journalists in 117 countries and territories, and more than 150 media organizations. And together, we made sense of all those files, and we made sense of that information, went outside the data, did reporting, looked also at data in public records to start finding what are the stories that are of public interest. Is there a system broken that is affecting citizens around the world? And that's how we started finding some patterns of that broken system too, and how it was affecting our citizens and building our previous reporting, what has changed or what kept going on. But how do we make sense of this? So I will walk and combine a bit the part of the technology, but also talk a bit about our stories. Our tech team has developed over the last years an open source tool called DataShare. And DataShare is very valuable for us because it allows us to share securely the millions of records and make them searchable, explorable. It also does entity extraction, so people can explore what DataShare has extracted automatically in terms of recognizing people, organizations, locations. It allows us to do batch searches, which is like uploading lists of names of people of public interest, let's say politicians, billionaires, and other people who could be potentially connected to stories in different parts of the world, and check if they are potentially in the data and explore this securely. So no one had to go to ICIJ's office to basically get access, but everyone around the world, all the journalists who were in this more than 117 countries had access to these files at the same level. And then we start sharing and communicating in another tool that we use that is called the Global iHub. We use the scores for that, and we adjust it to our needs and make sure that it's all encrypted and secure too. And here we share and communicate throughout the whole project. So we have a 24/7 virtual newsroom where we continue coordinating our efforts, but also help each other make sense of this big trough of data. So, but this is what a regular desk of a journalist would look like. And imagine that multiplied in millions. And that's basically at the end what we need to make sense. How do we organize this? How do we make, and in our case, our team, together with the tech team, we say, how can we make this accessible to all our network? We don't want only the people from like data people at ICIJ and other outlets to be the ones exploring the data and understanding the data. We want everyone to have access to it because everyone has different sources, has different like understanding of what's going on in their countries. And together that helps make sense and connect the dots. So we work collaboratively. We share radically everything, and we want data to be available for everyone. So not only the people who can code are the ones using the data or getting results from the analysis. So we want the data to drive our reporting. And basically, and you would ask yourself, well, where are the graphs? So I'm just starting here to walk us to why do we need to process all this data and how graph databases afterwards help us with our reporting process. So, but the first steps when we had this 40 providers, these millions of records, was to put order to that mess. And for each provider, the data was organized differently. So sometimes we had 10,000 page PDFs with information about beneficial owners. In other cases, we had manual forms where the information was there. So sometimes we had only about 4% of the data were like, we had spreadsheets. So that was very small for us, no? So we had to structure the data. And we use different methods. So in some cases we automated. We also use machine learning for dealing, and Miguel can tell you much more about that big problem we had with the 10,000 page PDFs to split and extract information there. We combined spreadsheets, but we also had to do a lot of manual work when like manual forms and validate some of the information that we had there. So, and at the end, we were generating structured information, spreadsheets with key information about who was behind the companies, who owns offshore companies. And that would allow us to dig deeper and find more documents tied to those companies and see what they were used for, who they are, and validate that information and generate country lists that we would share with our partners. But then we also do the whole process of fact-checking and verifying the information that we have in front of us. So we cross-reference against public records, and we do a lot of reporting to that expands what we find in the data. But that is central to our work. So, and in that term of connecting that data with public records, we look at sanctions lists, court cases, corporate registries, land registries, and so on. And that's how we ended up finding information about the beneficial owners of more than 20,000 companies. It was close to 29,000 beneficial owners, the information, and connected with citizens all around the world and entities and companies all around the world. And basically, that is unique because before we had like different officer roles, but in the case of the Pandora Papers, as a result of a change of regulation that happened after we published Panama Papers in the BVI that forced the providers to give information about who the final owners were, we had unique information that allowed us to know who the final person behind a company was. And then out of that, we did a lot of work, and we ended up finding inside those more than 330 politicians and high-level officials in more than 90 countries and territories who are using these offshore structures, offshore entities. Out of those 35 country leaders, we also found over 130 billionaires from 45 countries and territories, including 46 Russian oligarchs. This, in the case of also the politicians and high-level officials, showed people who can actually trigger some change were actually using also this system. And the uses vary a lot. And we will see, and you can go to our website to see many of the stories. And to connect that information, or part of it, like graph databases were central to us. So we use graph databases to facilitate the exploration of these big data sets that we have, and then we structured the information. So then you have here a more curated data, a graph data that allows you to explore the information of who are the final owners of these entities that we found in our records. And then you get information about when the company was registered and other details. And so that helps us make sure that we are understanding and exploring connections and see if there are hidden links between some of people of public interest that we're exploring or researching. And by doing this, for example, and connecting that data with public records, we identified, and this is a story that our colleague Will Fitzgibbon worked with other colleagues and others from different countries, that the King of Jordan bought about 14 properties in the UK and US for more than $106 million using offshore companies between 2003 and 2017. And so we did with other high-level politicians and what they were using the offshore companies for. In some cases, they were connected to also corruption cases. We also had new information on money laundering scandals, or scandals like the Banca d'Andorra in Venezuela, Spain, Andorra, and so on. So the looting of antiquities, and you can see many of these. Also the church, the Legionaries of Christ, there was information tied to them, and new revelations on where they're putting their money. And sometimes this money is tied or connected to illicit financial flow. So you will need to read every story and see what the money was used for, to see in which cases it was connected to that. In other cases, it's money that is lost in taxes and tax avoidance. But to do that, we have also an internal team, and that data, like some of the data, like in the case of what we have structured, we make publicly available throughout our offshore leaks database. These are all the people who have worked on it and make this possible. It's a wonderful and impressive team effort. So thanks to everyone. So this is Miguel and I are talking today, but there are lots of people who have been involved in making this data possible and validating this data, fact-checking, structuring the data, and making it searchable so that everyone, any citizen around the world can use and go to our public database and find information tied to Pandora Papers. And in the case of the offshore leaks database, it doesn't only contain information about the Pandora Papers, it's an impressive repository of information or data that has data on more than 800,000 offshore companies that comes from companies, foundations, and trusts. That comes from the Pandora Papers, Paradise Papers, Bahamas leaks, Panama Papers, and the offshore leaks investigations. It has more than 80 years of data, and it connects with more than 200 countries and territories. So you can actually click on filters that we have for countries and check for specific data tied to specific individuals, including some of the Russian oligarchs. Russia is heavily present in our offshore leaks data, but so are other countries and territories for which we have important information and individuals of public interest of all around the world. So that can power up investigations, and it has helped governments recover billions of dollars also as a result of using some of these information, as well as the results of our own investigations and stories. So you will see more, and I will let Miguel walk you more through our offshore leaks data, as well as how we use graph databases as part of our investigations. Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you, Emilia. Thank you. I'm Miguel Fiandor. I'm a data engineer of the data unit at ICIJ. So I'll continue from our offshore leaks.icij.org website, where is all the data that Emilia was talking about. So the first thing that we want you to know is that you can download all the data for you for free and without not requiring any registration. Just follow the download buttons trace, and you will land to this page where we offer that data in two formats. And as a zip containing CSV files as big tables, and you also can download Neo4j dumps of the actual offshore Neo4j database. The data contains about all of offshore investigations data from since 2013. And just have those links over there on the zip, and if you click on the GitHub repository, here you will be able to download the dumps at the data folder. And I will suggest to also to follow our README guides that are there, so you have some cool tips to get start on them and understand and explains how is the data and what you can do with it. I wanted to show you briefly what's about the CSVs. It's just a bunch of files about our nodes in our graph database, and one file, CSV file, containing the relationships between all those nodes. Behind is the table that represents the file of officers. So that's sample of what you will find in there, with the IDs of the nodes and the officers' names, countries, and what investigation was they come from. Also, you can play with our data in the Neo4j version. You can download those dumps, and with the Neo4j desktop application, which is very handy and very user-friendly. Just clicking on in a new project, clicking on Add, you will see Add a file. So you go to your downloaded file in your hard drive, select it, and it will be important in your project. And then it's a matter just to click right button or on the three buttons there and create a new database out of this dump database. So it's very simple to start up and going in Neo4j. Then it comes with the option you can run the Neo4j browser, which is we found that this tool super handy to dig in the database and learn from it. We developed a few guides with the thanks with the help of Miguel. About our data, that as you can see, you can play these commands, that command that you see there, and you will find more of this in a README guys that I told you before, and where you see some screenshots and descriptions and some text about it. So that helps people to get on board on the database. There is another third option if you don't want to download any data or install anything, or just want to have a quick view. Neo4j offers this very quick and cool service, which is the Neo4j Sandbox. And you have tons of different databases that you can start up the service for free, for temporary, for I think between 3 and 10 days. And they have our own database over there. So it's a matter of selecting ICIJ of Solix there, run it, and then it will pop up a quick walkthrough from our their colleague William, and it will show you very fast how to start a Neo4j browser online without installing anything, running our database. Next part I wanted to talk today is about why do we like graphs, why do we like Neo4j and Linkurious. First reason, more common, is because we are finding very handy the natural representation of the graphs of our kind of data. It makes it clearer to understand it, to read it, and to then to start analyzing it and investigating in it. As you can see, also a draw of the schema, it already is quite intuitive, and is I will find a bit more complex to start reading tables. But one other reason is that actually to get up on going on Neo4j is very easy. I find it very comfortable. You have either as a command line or a cipher. Queries are not too complex, not too difficult to learn it. But you have the Neo4j admin, for instance, command that you can load a full dump over there with just 2 parameters, nothing else. And you also have another option to start another database out of CSV files, like this example from they do for the movies use case, where you run Neo4j admin, import the database name you want, and the nodes files you have, and the relationships over there, and it works. And there are other ways also to import from CSV and from structured data. You have all the possibilities there. Then also something that we like in the test team is that we have Neo4j on Docker, So we start using the containers. And here is a case where we import our CSVs for one of our providers into one of Neo4j container. And then in the next one, we run that previous container because it has been shared the volumes, but I won't get into that. And then I have another example of running a plugin that is super handy for Neo4j, which is the APOC extension or plugin. It has a lot of features, and just by running such thing, I can export our running Neo4j container into all the data into a big Cypher file. So I wanted to show this quickly as an example of a little part of our ETL work in ICIJ. Another reason why we like the graphs is because of the schema flexibility. And you have to, as Emilia told before, we in this project we receive data from how many, whatever, multiple providers, close to 10 or something, and that means that data is very different among each other, and you end up it's better to have some flexibility in the schema and not fight against a very rigid tables. So this is one thing that we like to have. The other thing is, of course, it's fast. It's very fast. And one constraint that we have is that in order to investigate and to analyze our data and follow the beneficiary owners of a company, we don't know how many jumps we're going to do from the company till the beneficiary owner. We don't know how many companies are in the middle, intermediaries or addresses, and so on. We would like to have the possibility to go infinite, no? And if we traduce this or translate this into a relational databases, where we'll probably have to put some constraint about it. And that's what we avoid with graph technology. The crazy joins loop, and that's why these houses represent the index free that the graph give us. Sorry, index free adjacency is. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is that how does look our data in offshore lakes? It's not that it's not a big huge hairball. All the nodes are connected with all the nodes or something like this. It's actually there are tons and millions of small hubs with a few some connections depending on its case. We have few officers, maybe one address each, maybe not. And some of them are connected to a super connector, an intermediary, or sometimes not, or a super address that where is a pure postal office box that every company is registered there. But that means that if we think about this, how this will look in a table-driven system or database. And I will say definitely the graph design and the graph visualizations, I think, gives much possibilities in addition to represent these small hubs. And probably the best thing to, if we're going to draw graphs, is to have also a graph system underneath. About Linkurious is the software layer that we always put on top of Neo4j, and we offer it. We are using it in our offshore lakes project, and we offer it to our partners as an investigation platforms internally. And one of the biggest reasons is is clean user interface and how friendly it is. Although imagine to put your end users on about graphs, it always takes some. It takes some time, but Linkurious is very intuitive and it's not crowded with all its actions that you can perform on the graphs. It's descriptive. Every time you want to see, you have the information next to you, and you have a lot of possibilities. One of the coolest features I would say is the possibility of undoing a step. Imagine you span a super connectivity node and you want to revert that back. Most of like everything is you can go back. And from the administration point of view, it's very easy to configure both softwares. Of course, you have complex situations, and you have then to be tech savvy, but to get up both systems running and import data and index it and have it there is a matter of minutes if you go in the default and basic options. And one cool feature that we've been using lately is that Linkurious offer an API that we can actually automate our creation of visualizations and share them and export them. So those widgets that actually publish in our Power Players app about those politicians that Emilia was talking, we were able to automate this kind of work. And so we created automatically these visualizations internally in our Linkurious, and then make those visualizations as widgets, getting a URL for each, and then being able to export them and make them shareable. That was very handy. These are quick snippets about it. And the next thing is about having our work being able to export it and being shareable. And our partners know that well, because we provide that functionality of embed our widgets in their own websites, all those outlets, media websites, and our own. So that's a functionality that you will be seeing about Linkurious when you visit a Power Players app or this story about Alejandro Gertz Manero in our website. And with this, I will hand it in.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I'm going to now give you a bit of a glimpse into Linkurious Enterprise and show you how it works. So this is the Linkurious Enterprise UI, and we are connected to the offshore leaks database. Emilia mentioned the King of Jordan, Abdullah Al-Sharif Al-Hussein, and we are going to search for him. And we are going to see how Linkurious Enterprise can help with this type of investigation. So we can see a node representing Abdullah Al-Sharif in the middle of the screen. You can see some of the information related to that individual on the left. I can double click and retrieve everything that Abdullah Al-Sharif is connected to. So I'm going to go ahead and double click. So I can see the various entities such as a company is the officer of. There's also another person he shares the same name with, and a location. If I want, I can undo what I just did, and instead of retrieving everything at once, maybe only retrieve the address that Abdullah Al-Sharif is connected to, or I can retrieve the company is an officer of. So I can make this sort of choices easily. In Linkurious Enterprise, we also provide query templates to automate some complex investigation steps. Here I'm going to trigger one of those query templates by clicking on queries and clicking on find indirect connections. In a couple of clicks, really, I've identified a small network. So this would be a starting point, and we can see that Abdullah Al-Shaif Al-Hussein is connected to multiple event entities, such as this address right here in Jordana, but also another address in the British Virgin Islands across 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 entities. And I'm, able to quickly get that type of insights with a query template. I'm going to show you now what it looks like behind the scenes. So you can see the query template that we triggered. I can edit it, and I can see the actual code for that. So it's really a way to automate complex investigation workflows with Cypher and graph queries. Okay. In Linkers Enterprise, you can also do some more advanced search. So I'm going to click here on advanced. You can see that you can play with the fuzziness to identify potential variations around the name that we are interested in. Here I'm going to go ahead and add a few of those names to the screen. Yeah, I guess I'm going to go ahead and add everything. Okay. Let's go ahead and retrieve the connections of these nodes. Okay. And we can see, that our friend Abdullah Al-Shaif Al-Hussein is actually connected to a lot of entities, not just one. We can get a better feel for what's happening by putting the filter panel on the right. So we can see that indirectly is connected to 23 entities. I can locate them quickly like that. Maybe I want to sort of understand these various entities. I can see that they have different statuses. Some of them are inactive or dissolved, so maybe they're not so interesting to me. I just want to locate the ones that are currently active. I can do that, in a couple of clicks. I can also use the Linkers Enterprise UI to make sense of the temporal element of the data. I'm going to go ahead and bring information about the timestamp associated with the various entities, and this gives me some information about where the data was last edited. Basically, it's around December. December 2021. So that gives me an important information while I'm assessing the data. All of these information that we have uncovered, we can save them. Okay. We can, export the visualization to a number of formats, such as a spreadsheet or a picture. But we can also actually go ahead and share visualization with a colleague. I would simply have to type his username or email to be able, in a couple of clicks, really, to share the visualization with such a colleague. So we have seen together how to use the Linkers Enterprise UI to dive into the data, quickly find insights, and all of that simply by using easy to use buttons, I guess. No need to be a graph expert, and that's really sort of the sort of outcome that we want to help our clients achieve with this product. And finally, something that I haven't been able to show in the demo is that you can also generate alerts and be notified every time a certain pattern emerges in your data to be proactive about how you are about your data and proactive about identifying suspicious activities. So that's it for a quick demo of Linkurious Enterprise. I hope it has given you a bit of a feel for all the product can help investigation teams. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Sean. Let me go back to the slides. So thanks a lot. So my name is Michael Hunger. I'm Director for User Innovation at Neo4j. I used to run developer relations at Neo4j and now focusing on more user experience across the board for Neo4j, which I'm really happy and excited about. I wanted to talk a little bit about how actually ICIJ does a much better job at providing good services on top of financial and offshore league and other kinds of financial data. So you've seen this data model before. So it's a pretty simple, straightforward data model. You have the company, the entity in the middle, the shell company, officers that might be beneficiary owners or just straw people as officers, the intermediaries, the banks and law firms that create these shell companies, and then they all have addresses. So the basic data model is pretty simple, and we'll revisit it at the end and see what else we can do with this. First of all, I want to to highlight things that Emilia and Miguel already pointed out. The ICIJ is really on top of their game. So I really need to applaud the ICIJ team for taking really messy data from all kinds of sources and turning it into something that journalists can work with and build and report these stories. So they don't stop at saying, okay, this is what we got and we just use what we can read, but they go the extra mile of verifying data using technology, ML, NLP algorithms to extract more data from, for instance, scanned documents. They integrate with other data sources. I'll talk a little bit more about this soon. And they're also building platforms like DataShare to actually make this data available to others and allow collaboration between journalists, right? If you compare this with how most financial institutions and governments, at least to the public, work there. So there's definitely a lack of urgency and accountability, right? No one really wants to share their data transparently with the bigger world. And although the ICIJ caused some transparency laws being enacted, it's way too little and too late. Many organizations also use either no technologies, or we've seen in the ICIJ data also that there's still a lot of paper documents, scanned documents that are just attached somewhere, and handwritten notes and things like that, or outdated technologies that don't keep up with the things, basically being in the world of forms and relational databases at most, or spreadsheets if you're lucky. Right. Another thing that's really interesting is in many organizations and also governments, both the data management, also the teams working with this data are siloed. So they don't collaborate, they don't work with each other, which is very different from the ICIJ, where you see people from across the globe, from lots of different media organizations, which are usually competing with each other for publications, are working together to further the causes that are really important. Right. And so transparency, it's not interesting to many organizations and institutions. And given that we also know that there's a low credibility for these scores, right? So don't go the extra effort where the ICIJ goes really deep and spends years on making this data shine, basically, and being able to make use of it, right? Pulling data together from different sources and enriching it as well. If you are working in the financial industry, actually graphs can help you in a lot of different areas, right? So one thing that we see from the ICIJ is kind of the cross-team data sharing that I already mentioned. So if you make your data available to other teams, then of course everyone can pull in and pool their resources, put in new data sources and formats, and you basically get more than the sum of the parts, which is really great because much of the power of data lies in what's connecting information, right? Not in the individual pieces of information, but what's connecting information. And with graphs, you can also see patterns emerge, right? So you see money laundering rings, you see kind of split transactions, you see certain accounts or certain clusters of accounts receiving a lot of money and so on. So there's a lot of abilities in the fraud detection and anti-money laundering space to use graphs to detect patterns and then automate also detecting these patterns. So you get real-time AML as well, which ties back, of course, to adhering to your legal obligations for risk and compliance. And this goes way beyond just your own organization, but it also goes to your suppliers, second-tier, third-tier suppliers. Whom are you working with? Are these people? What kind of risk do they bring to your organization? And so on. So there's a lot of potential there. And if you really want to provide a better service to your customers, or if you want to understand your customers better, so to that actually this customer is actually a criminal that I should not do business with, then it's better important that you kind of understand and evaluate what are all the other things that your customer is doing with you, but also with partners, so you understand better, and either you can help the customer to do a bit better business with you and with them, or you can avoid kind of dealing with these customers in the first place, or even report them to the authorities. If you want to take your data that you have existing and you want to enrich it, there's actually a massive treasure trove of other sources that you can connect to, right? So I'm just mentioning a few of them. Emilia already had a few of them on her slide as well. So there's property ownership data. So some countries publish a lot of property ownership data. There are different company registries, public ones. There's open corporates. There's even a Wikipedia list of like all business registers in the world. Of course, there's no commonality in data format and APIs and so on. So you have to basically do the work of pulling in the information, but you can do it. There are sanctions lists, which are especially important now. The number of sanctions on those lists kind of jumped massively in the last few weeks, as you can imagine. But combining that with your customer data, you actually detect that, oh, this person opening an account actually should stay away from them and probably rather report them than doing business with them to just earn another few $1 million or so. And then data validation services where you can go checking addresses, checking other information about people as well. And there's more. So for instance, if you want to be up to date, you can integrate with news data like the GDL project, or connect to social media APIs, so you can actually get alerts when something happens around the people and companies that you're working with. You can look at ownership tracking for vehicles, for properties, for airplanes, and so on. So you actually know, okay, the people that I'm dealing with, kind of where are they going, right? Where do they have their things registered, and so on. One interesting source of additional information is government contracts. Actually, both the US as well as the EU have large public databases that you can get, where you see whom is the government contracting for which kind of tasks. And so that's also interesting to see things like, okay, is there someone who used to be a politician or is in lobbyism, and then suddenly there are government contracts popping up with them? And is this something that I want to prevent, or is this something that I want to look deeper into as such? Speaking of industry, there's also lobby registers, bribery registers. There's the FinCEN investigation, which highlighted a lot of these industry data things there, where the US Agency for Financial Transactions in the Department of Treasury actually has a lot of this data, but it's usually not public, which is really sad, and so on. You have a lot of internal data sources from all your other departments and accounts that you can work with, right? So there's a treasure trove of data even within your own organization. And then, of course, if you work with government agencies, the tax authorities, customer authorities, crime investigations have a lot of data. So if you make your data transparently available to them, they can help you in return to prevent you from getting entrenched into illegal activities. And the same is true for law tracking. So if I take this data and now add all these other information, then I see still my base data model, but you can see how this all connects to taxes of officers and entities, how the FinCEN files might refer to shell companies, and so on. And so there's a lot of extra stuff. So actually, we could also connect the property information, not just to the shell companies, but also to addresses and so on. And this only scratches the surface. So I think if you really dive into graphs as a means to model and work and process your data, then you will suddenly see that as soon as you have one connection point that relates two of your information sources, then you can pull another chunk of data in and another subset of data in that allows you to know more about what you're dealing with and query this data in a much better fashion. And so there's the sky is the limit. So of course we only touched like small parts of what's possible here, but if you want to learn more, there are many resources available on knowledge graphs, of graph data science, of investigative journalism. So feel free to check them out and let us know if you want to learn more, or share if you have other things that you would like to try out and work with. Welcome back, everyone, and let's have some questions from the audience.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. First of all, before we go into questions from the audience, I'd like to have a quick panel discussion. Before I do that, a huge thank you to all our speakers today. The presentations and demo were just really, really informative. So thank you very much. And I want to call this the fun part of the webinar because this is where we get to discuss. So if I could get all of you to come off of mute, I'd appreciate it. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to start off with a first question for Miguel. Miguel, what kind of data do you think is suitable for graph projects? I mean, you've worked so much with a lot of the data, right? So what kind of data do you think is suitable for that?
For the experience we have, obviously, first is connected data. Is this kind of data that is represented? Different entities are connected between each other by any reason, but multiple times. It's a matter more of those connections than quantification, where I would think that is becoming the table and quantifying and statistics comes into play. So mostly the reason about that connectivity, and when that connectivity gets complex, there is even more stronger reasons for that.
I totally get it. Yes, the relationships between data is probably the most important thing, right? Because you're connecting entities to each other. I can also see maybe especially in data journalism, you would have a lot of hierarchical or nested data, data that's hidden. So I think all of those play a big role. Okay, Emilia, I'm gonna ask you a question. You talked about leaks, but what if there are no data leaks? How do you do an investigation without a data leak? Is it even possible?
Oh, of course it is possible. And we have projects at ICIJ that are non-leak based. For instance, implant files. That was a project we did a few years ago where we actually did like freedom of information requests around the world to gather information on how medical devices were recalled and also adverse events tied to medical devices. And we reviewed the approval systems of medical devices and how some of that system, like some fast forward approvals, were conducting to approvals of some devices that were harming patients. So and then we gathered all together, there were some public databases, like for instance, the FDA have an adverse events database that is publicly available for patients, but it's not all like that around the world. So we ended up gathering about more than 8 million records to do our analysis, and we ended up actually publishing a medical devices recall database, so patients around the world could check and monitor if they were going to get a medical device to see if it had been harming people or not. So you can actually do a lot of investigations also with not starting with a leak. So for us, the leak started investigation, and we spent 2 years going through public records. Not all the information that you find in our leaks is illegal too. So you find a lot of uses of offshore vary a lot. So we need to spend a lot of time checking to see, is there something illegal? Is there any wrongdoing? Is this of public interest? And then going and doing a lot of reporting on public sources. Michael mentioned some of those, and other records, like finding contracts and other kind of information to then do the whole investigation. So there are many great investigations that don't start with a leak. And in our case, we have done leaked and non-leaked based investigations. And in all cases, for us, it's also important the whole data gathering analysis, so we can explore topics systematically to see, is there a system broken that is affecting citizens around the world? But then also the whole reporting and reaching for comments. So we contact every person that we mention in our stories. So for instance, in the case of the King of Jordan, he said, well, he doesn't need to declare taxes, or someone, a lawyer from the UK told us he doesn't need to declare taxes, and he uses the company for privacy and other reasons. So that's and in every part of our stories, you will see for each person we write about what the response is. Sometimes they don't answer, But for us, it's like a full process. But data is central to any of our investigations, either leaked or non-leaked.
So that's so interesting. Just a quick question. Percentage-wise, how many come from leaks and how many are non-leaks? Do we?
Well, it depends. Like, it depends if it, like ICIJ projects, we have had several leak-based projects and massive leaks, but we have great journalists all around the world, and I have seen many investigations that are not leaked. So if I would look at the universe, it's hard for me to tell. But we have had errors, like, so before offshore leaks, many of our investigations were non-leak based. Offshore leak triggered a sense of like other like whistleblowers and sources reaching either ICIJ or partners from our network who have then like are interested in the reporting we do and trust our organization to explore that information and do the whole reporting. So that's why we had an increasing collection of leak-based investigations. But we also had a project like on mining in Africa. We had another project on World Bank funding in different countries, and so we had several non-leak, but like the percentage varies, and we keep mining both. And you can pitch us ideas if it's not a leak, we welcome ideas of potential good stories where you think we should put an eye on, because we do the work either like as with implant files or with the leaks, as like doing the whole reporting and gathering a full network to explore the topic systematically.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, quick question. Where do you see the main benefit for journalists putting information into a shared graph?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think the ICIJ demonstrated it really well, right? So if you start sharing your information, you don't compete with each other, but you work together, then basically the work of one journalist can support another journalist, right? While I'm researching something, I put my information into the shared database, and then for someone else, the dots can connect, and suddenly their story makes more sense because something another journalist actually unearthed connects, for instance, two people or two companies on their side of the things. The other aspect is, I think, because graph databases are really good at not requiring a schema for managing the data, right? So you can add the data as you go. And if you discover new kinds of relationships that weren't there before or new kinds of attributes of your data, then you can just add them, right? So you don't need to prepare and upfront decide, okay, this goes in and this doesn't go in. So you can rather err on the side of adding everything to the graph. So because you don't know upfront, is this actually needed in my investigation or not? And if you prevent things from going in, then certain aspects might not be even visible, and people might not be aware of that as such. Right. So these are two ways of how graphs can benefit in data journalism.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jean, and since we're running out of time, really quickly, how is the combination of Neo4j and Linkurious used outside of data journalism? Are there other uses?
Thanks for this question. First, we love supporting data journalists for sure, and the work that the ICIJ has been doing. We are great fans at Linkurious, but obviously we also work with other organizations. Interestingly, the things that we have seen in today's webinar, the financial crime fighting that ICIJ has built expertise around, we are also helping organizations such as banks, insurance companies, payment transfer companies, applying exactly the same techniques to clean up their own operations, identify fraudsters, identify money launderers, and fight back against financial crime in their own realm. So that's something that we are very passionate about, and we also have clients that are applying our investigation platform in other use cases such as cybersecurity, law enforcement, or even data governance.
Yeah, and I think it expands beyond just even financial use cases. Obviously there are a lot of other use cases. I know we've gone over time, so I'd like to thank everyone on the panel again, and I'm going to hand it over to Marilee for any questions from the audience. Marilee?
Great, thank you so much. This has been both fantastic and fascinating at the same time. I mean, Thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. So we have had some questions from the audience, and I'm going to go through these because I know we're short on time. So I'm going to pick out just a few. And for those in the audience, if your question isn't answered, you can just send an email to webinar@neo4j.com and we'll follow up with you, or someone from Neo4j will reach out directly to you in response to your question. So I'm going through here. So here's one. So how can people support ICIJ's work?
Well, that's a very important question. Thanks so much. As we are a nonprofit, yes, so people can go to our website on one side. Like if you want to donate, you can go to the support section and donate to ICIJ. Even $1 is welcome. Like we have an insiders program. So depending on your donations, you get perks. Also, if you have any idea or any data that you would like to share with us, you can always also leak to us and flag things that you think would be worth exploring. And of course, help give visibility to the work we do and our network does. That's always helpful, but feel free to contact us. You can contact ICIJ through contact@icij.org. And if you have any data related questions or also ideas that you would like to share with us, you can contact us through data@icij.org.
Great, thank you. And I think this goes hand in hand with that. So what can people do if they find something relevant in the Offshore Leaks database?
Well, there are a few things that people can do. So, and we were talking, and I think Michael gave some clues too. We were talking about, first you can check who these people are, and if there are links, because there can be homonyms. So you need to check and verify if the person you're researching is really the person you're researching, because there's some very common names. So you can check for addresses and additional information in the database to see if you can confirm the identity of the person. Then once you find the key information about the company, you can go through public records and check what was that company used for. You can go to the registries, for example, you can go to Open Corporates and update the information, because our data goes through a specific year from when the leak goes through a specific year. So then it's important for you to check what happened after we published the information, because things might have changed. The company might have closed, might have changed shareholders, owners, but also look into court records and contractors' information to expand and see how that company and that person connects with other dots outside the data. Journalists can also contact us, and if they are investigating something tied to our data, our team can help and see if we have additional documents that can help with the research. So and we know several investigations that came out after other colleagues expanding our work and looking into the Offshore Leaks database, because we don't publish documents en masse for privacy reasons and other reasons that we explain in our Offshore Leaks data. But these dots and all this information about the owners, shareholders, and other offices and the companies is quite unique and opens up a great source of information that other corporate registries are still not making available in some parts of the world. In others, there has been some progress after some of the publication of our investigations.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And let's see, it looks like we have time for maybe about one more. So can you tell us a bit more about how data analysis and technology has impacted the work of investigative journalists? I would imagine things are changing rapidly with the tools and technology that are available.
Yeah, would you like to add to that, or Miguel, or if it's our last question, I would like for you to talk a bit, and I can complement.
No, sir. Better you go and.
Okay. Yeah. No. Well, the data journalism and technology has been central, and I think some of the projects that we're talking about, and Maya mentioned at the beginning, and we also mentioned in our presentation, wouldn't be possible without data and technology. So, because we're talking about sharing files and sharing documents and data with hundreds of journalists around the world and making that securely. So otherwise, and because we trust and believe that, well, local journalists have the best sources and can help, and connecting networks of journalists can only be possible with the technology. And exploring and mining these millions of records, if you had like all on paper, how do you connect the dots of that information? So it powers up our investigation. It helps us see sometimes hidden links that otherwise would be very hard to trace. Those are very powerful in terms of also tools and resources that allow journalists to go beyond what was possible to do before. So basically, before, like, you could look at some information in a localized manner, perhaps check some records in other countries, calling a colleague. Now you can check those records using the internet, for instance. Like, that's also really important. And then how do you connect that information and find patterns within that? So all that is essential and has shaped journalism in a different way, has made collaborative investigative journalism a possibility. So it wouldn't be possible, like journalism we're talking about today, without data and technology.
Great, thank you so much. And it looks like we are about at time. Maya, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to say?
I just want to say this was a really, really informative and excellent webinar. And, I am very pleased that we got this group together to share the work that was done by the ICIJ with the tools, both Neo4j as well as Linkurious. And I thank all the panelists, and I hope we get to do another one really soon, to be honest. So with that, I will say thank you to our audience, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have
Thanks.
a great day.